All right, let's dive into personality today, huh? Those traits and types, the stuff that makes us us.
And we're going deep, not just skimming the surface.
Nope, full-on deep dive. With your source material here, looks like we've got excerpts from a personality textbook. Should be good.
Yeah, think of it like this. By the end, you'll have like this whole new way of looking at yourself and everyone you know.
Basically, we're handing you the keys to the personality kingdom.
Exactly.
No pressure. So the book lays out four main approaches that researchers use to study personality.
Like different paths up the same mountain, yeah.
You've got your single trait approach, many trait, essential trait, and then, the typological approaches.
It's like a toolkit, with all sorts of instruments to try and measure and understand this thing we call personality.
Before we get lost in the weeds here, I think it's good to remember that traits aren't like destiny.
Oh, definitely not. More like tendencies, patterns we see and how people behave over time.
So someone high in, let's say, shyness, they're not going to be hiding in a corner 2047, but generally they'll be more reserved, right?
Exactly, compared to someone low on that trait.
Makes sense. So starting with that single trait approach, researchers pick one characteristic and really dig deep.
The book focuses on two pretty interesting ones, self-monitoring and narcissism.
Ooh, good ones. Okay, first up, self-monitoring. Ever feel like you're putting on a different mask depending on who you're with?
That's self-monitoring in action.
The book talks about high self-monitors being like chameleons, right? They're always adapting.
Yeah, constantly scanning the room, picking up on cues, figuring out how they should be acting.
So like that friend who's super quiet at work, but then boom, life of the party when you're out.
Exactly. Low self-monitors, much more consistent, their own drumbeat, regardless of the social situation.
Like a core set of values and behaviors, they stick to it.
Yeah, and here's the thing, neither is inherently better or worse.
It's about knowing yourself, right? Where you fall and how that affects how you interact with others.
For example, high self-monitors, they seem adaptable, but the book points out authenticity can be a struggle.
Always performing, got to be exhausting.
Oh, yeah, and there's research on this. High self-monitors tend to do better in, job interviews.
Because they can play the game, adapt to the interviewer.
Right, they also build bigger social networks, make friends easily.
But flip side, more likely to maybe bend the truth a bit to get what they want.
Even in, say, dating.
Oh, getting juicy.
And there's this concept, mate poaching, basically trying to steal someone's partner.
Wow, okay.
Research suggests high self-monitors more susceptible both to being poached and doing the poaching.
Maybe because they're tuned into those social dynamics, opportunities.
This shows how these simple traits have these, ripple effects in our lives.
Okay, moving on from self-monitoring, let's talk narcissism.
A myth, right. Narcissus, falling in love with his reflection.
We all know that person who can't stop talking about themselves.
Could be a sign, yeah. Excessive self-love, as the book defines it.
But here's the thing. It's not always a bad thing.
Right. The book actually highlights how those narcissistic traits can be, well, charming.
Oh yeah, first impression, they kill it.
Confident, charismatic, attractive quality.
For sure. But there's a shadow side, too.
Oh, absolutely. Textbook describes it as entitlement, manipulation, even aggression when their ego's threatened.
Like a fragile self-image they got to protect, even if it pushes people away.
Exactly. This leads to the big question, is narcissism actually on the rise?
The me culture.
The book presents both sides.
Some say everyone gets a trophy mentality, social media, it's breeding narcissism.
Others argue it's overblown, or we're just more aware of it now.
Interesting debate, makes you think about what's shaping us culturally.
For sure. And key thing, narcissism is a spectrum, not black and white.
Not just a label you slap on.
Right, some traits, but not full-blown disorder.
So the degree, not just the label itself, that's important.
Now, shifting gears a bit, the book talks about the many-trait approach, looking at a bunch of traits together.
Like a recipe, trying to understand how all the ingredients interact.
The book uses this tool, the California Q set.
This is cool. Imagine 100 personality descriptions, not just words, but phrases, and you rank them for someone.
The catch, you can't just say all good or all bad. You got to compare them all.
So you're making these nuanced judgments, building up a portrait.
Exactly. Two great examples in the book, how our talking reveals personality and the link between childhood personality and, get this, adult political beliefs.
Wait, talking. You wouldn't think the words we use say that much?
Oh, they do. Study analyzed thousands of words from conversations, matched them to personality ratings from friends.
Looking for patterns, huh?
Yeah, they focused on certainty words, like absolutely sure, conveying confidence in the results.
Yeah.
People using more certainty words rated as intelligent, fluent, even ambitious.
Makes sense. Someone sure of themselves uses those words more.
But here's the kicker. Also described as concerned with appearance, bodily functions.
What? That's a strange connection.
It is, right? Shows how even with patterns, these quirks pop up. That's what's fascinating about personality research.
Okay, color me intrigued. Now, the political beliefs study,
This one's wild. You wouldn't think your politics as an adult link back to childhood personality, right?
you'd think it's experiences, what you're exposed to, all that.
Well, this study, they followed kids from nursery school all the way to adulthood, tracking their
Huh.
personalities. Kids described as anxious, guilty, not handling stress well in nursery school, more likely to be conservative as adults.
Wow.
And those who were resourceful, independent, confident, leaned liberal later on.
Like the seeds are planted way back then.
Fascinating, right? But lots of explanations. The book stresses that,
Not just cause and effect, yeah.
for example, certain personalities might be drawn to different environments as they grow, shaping their views.
Makes sense. A cautious, rule-following kid might end up in more structured settings, influencing their politics.
Precisely. And not everyone fits the mold, of course.
Always exceptions.
True, but still, mind-blowing study raises so many questions about personality and ideology, how they're tied together.
Makes you wonder about your own childhood. Does it hint at your politics today?
Absolutely. And speaking of ideology, this touches on the authoritarian personality idea.
Oh yeah, the book describes that type as fearful of change, liking order and authority.
Research suggests those folks are more likely to support strong leaders, especially when society's unstable.
Like craving that stability, that strong hand.
Maybe. The book even mentions this study. In Romania, after communism fell, lots of former communists ended up supporting fascist parties.
Whoa, that's a twist.
Yeah, drawn to that strong leadership style regardless of the specifics.
Shows how personality drives our choices in ways we don't even realize.
Totally. But can't oversimplify, the book's careful to say.
Not every authoritarian personality is going to vote for a dictator, right?
Exactly. Cultural, historical factors matter too. And gotta remember, most research is done by, well, academics.
Who tend to lean liberal, yeah.
So potential for bias, always there. Important to be critical, consider other viewpoints.
For sure. The book brings up Jonathan Haidt's work, too, adds another layer.
Oh, Haidt, great stuff. Moral psychology, right?
Yeah, he argues that liberals and conservatives, they actually prioritize different moral values.
Not just disagreeing on issues, but coming from different frameworks entirely.
So it's deeper than we think.
Haidt suggests both value fairness, caring, but conservatives, they value things like loyalty, authority, purity more.
And that explains why some issues like flag burning or same-sex marriage are so divisive. They hit those core values.
It's a good way to move past that simple left versus right, see the validity in different moral viewpoints.
Like, even if I disagree, there might be good reasons why you believe what you believe.
Exactly. Wow, this is a lot of info. Ready to move on to the essential trait approach.
Let's do it. We've done single traits, multiple traits, time for the essentials, the VIPs,
The big five, here we come.
extroversion, neuroticism, conscientiousness, agreeableness, openness. Those are the big names.
The textbook explains they came from factor analysis, a statistical way to find patterns.
So taking all those personality descriptions, sorting them into 5 neat piles.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, these traits are mostly orthogonal, meaning scoring high on one doesn't predict the others.
So they cover a lot of ground. Really helps us for research, understanding what makes people different.
Now, the book does say they're not always totally independent.
Oh.
Like agreeableness, conscientiousness, and low neuroticism, they often group up what some call the stability dimension.
And extroversion, openness, those go together too.
Yeah, that's the plasticity dimension.
Fascinating. Some researchers even think these broader dimensions might be biological, but that's for another time.
Right, a deep dive for another day. But first, let's unpack each of the big five. The book's really clear. These are broad, each with lots of facets underneath.
It's not just high or low, there's nuance, right?
Absolutely. So let's start with extroversion. Ever feel like you need a constant buzz to feel alive? That inner extrovert, maybe? The book talked about Hans Eysenck. He's a personality psychology legend. He suggested that introverts are actually more sensitive to stimulation.
Oh, interesting. So it's not that introverts need more, it's that introverts get overwhelmed easier.
Precisely. Eysenck did this study. Introverts salivated more than extroverts when they got lemon juice in their mouths.
Okay, that's a visual. So extroverts, are they all just thrill seekers, needing constant excitement?
Not necessarily. The big five definition's a bit broader. Active, assertive, outgoing, seeking social engagement, all part of it.
Like that friend, always a million plans, loves being around people.
Classic extroversion. And the research, it's full of surprises. Extroverts tend to walk faster, be seen as more attractive, and this is good, they get targeted for mate poaching more often.
Wait, mate poaching again? Remind me what that is?
Someone trying to steal your partner, basically. Extroverts more susceptible, maybe because they're more social, go to more parties.
Maybe linked to the fact that they tend to drink more alcohol, which the book also mentions.
It's all connected, right?
Yeah, so much to think about. But every strength has a weakness, right? What's the downside of being extroverted?
Well, the book does say sometimes they can be argumentative, controlling, not great with time management.
And even though they're linked to happiness, they might gain weight easier too. So not all sunshine and roses.
Balance is key. Okay, on the other side, neuroticism, all about how strongly you experience negative emotions.
That friend who's always worrying or gets stressed out easily, even by little things.
Exactly, and it's not just being moody. High neuroticism is linked to a lot of challenges. Relationship problems, job dissatisfaction, higher risk of mental health issues, even criminal behavior.
The book's quick to point out most people high in neuroticism aren't criminals, though.
Right, it's a small increase in likelihood compared to others, but still, high neuroticism can make life harder. They feel stressed, sensitive to criticism, overwhelmed by, well, everything.
Like they see the world through a darker lens.
Could be. But even though there are downsides, understanding this trait helps us cope, build resilience.
Definitely. Okay, conscientiousness, what's that all about?
Organized, dependable, following the rules, that's the gist.
I feel like I'm failing already.
No judgment here, but the book even says you can see conscientiousness in animals.
Really?
Yeah, like birds building nests carefully, bees defending their hive responsibly.
That's a great fun fact. Gotta remember that.
Back to humans, though, high conscientiousness is great at work. On time, meet deadlines, every detail
A
covered.
reliable one.
And the benefits go beyond work. Safer drivers live longer, healthier overall. They're less likely to smoke, overeat, or do risky things, according to the research.
Sounds like they've got it figured out.
They do a lot, right? But of course, there's a flip side.
Let's hear it.
Well, they can feel a lot of guilt, anxiety if they don't meet expectations, theirs or others.
Makes sense.
And sometimes a bit too rigid, conforming, not enough rebellious spirit.
Again, no trait is all good or all bad.
Right. Balance is important. All right. Agreeableness. What do we have here?
This is about being kind, compassionate, getting along with others.
The textbook talks about this psychologist, Robert Hogan. His theory is agreeableness evolved because we needed cooperation to survive back in the day.
Like small social groups got to work together.
Exactly. And research shows a lot of benefits. Agreeable people are seen as more trustworthy, have healthier hearts, even recover from illness faster.
They're the ones who say nice things, make you feel good.
Absolutely. But being agreeable doesn't mean you're a pushover. The book uses the example of someone trying to get them to cheat. They're more likely to shut that down.
Good boundaries. And speaking of, research shows agreeable kids get bullied less.
Interesting. The book asks, though, does that come at the cost of social status? Something to think about.
For sure. Okay, last one. Openness to experience, also called culture or intellect, right?
Yeah, this one's got a lot of names, and it's the most debated of the big five. The book acknowledges that.
So what's the debate about?
Some see it as intellectual curiosity, creativity. Others say it's about cultural exposure, education.
And some aren't even sure it's a real personality trait at all.
A lot of opinions. But one thing's for sure, high openness folks. They're imaginative, open-minded, unconventional, drawn to art, liberal politics, new ideas.
Try new foods, traveling, all that.
That's them. But be warned, high openness can lead to some, well, interesting beliefs. College students high in this, more likely to believe in UFOs, astrology, ghosts.
Open to everything.
And they might be seen as intelligent, but sometimes that thirst for knowledge leads to overestimating what they know.
The too smart for their own good problem.
Exactly. Now, the book does raise a point. Are 5 traits really enough to describe all of personality?
Good question.
Some say we need a 6th, honesty, humility.
Interesting. The book talks about how that includes integrity, fairness, not being manipulative.
A good addition, maybe. Lots of debate in the field about that.
Makes sense. But even with 6, there's probably still stuff we're missing.
That's the beauty of this research. Always more to discover. And with that, I think it's time for the final approach. The typological approaches.
Typologies, oh boy. This is where we get into those personality types you see everywhere, right?
Yep, and the book's honest, this approach has some serious challenges.
Like what?
The big idea is people might be different in kind, not just in degree, like apples and oranges.
Not just about putting someone on a scale, but saying they're fundamentally different types of people.
Right. The problem is trying to find those clear personality types. It hasn't worked out that well.
It's tough to categorize people, right?
Yeah, one researcher even compared it to, remember Muhammad Ali? He had this funny way of categorizing people. Pomegranates, walnuts, prunes, grapes.
I remember that.
Hard on the outside, soft on the inside, all that. Take those typologies with a grain of salt,
So should we just ignore them completely?
Not necessarily. There's one that got some attention. Abshalom Caspi, he had 3 types. Well-adjusted, maladjusted, over-controlled, maladjusted, under-controlled.
Interesting name.
So 2 ways to be messed up, but only one way to be, well-adjusted.
Makes sense. The well-adjusted are adaptable, resourceful, good in relationships. Over-controlled are uptight, rigid, can't enjoy
And
things.
under-controlled, they're impulsive, risky, create
You
chaos.
can see how those patterns play out in real life.
Oh, yeah. But the book's careful. These types don't predict behavior any better than traits do. And then there's the issue of cutoff scores.
Cutoff scores, what's that?
Well, most personality traits, they're on a bell curve. Most people are in the middle, right?
Makes sense.
But typologies, they use a cutoff, and suddenly very different people get lumped together, while similar people end up in different categories.
Like saying everyone over 5'8" is tall, everyone under is short.
Exactly. Which brings us to the Myers-Briggs, the MBTI.
Oh yeah, that one's everywhere.
Most widely known personality typology, and the book doesn't hold back. One of the most criticized.
It's pretty popular though, people love it.
It is. It's interesting. You get 16 types based on 4 dimensions. Extroversion versus introversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, judging versus perceiving.
So you get your ESTP, your INFJ, each with a description.
And those descriptions, they're often so vague, so flattering, no wonder people like taking it.
But the book's not convinced. Low reliability, meaning your type might change if you take it again later.
And no evidence it predicts anything useful, like career success or anything like that.
More for fun than serious assessment.
Like a fancy horoscope, but you pay for it.
Gosh, that's harsh but funny.
Maybe a bit harsh, but important to know the limitations before you take it too seriously.
Totally. So after all that criticism, is there any point to thinking about types?
Maybe. The book says they can be useful shorthands, summarizing complex traits. And they can show how traits interact.
So if you say artist type, you think creative, sensitive, unconventional, altogether.
Right, a quick picture even if it's not perfect.
But it's a starting point, not the final word.
Exactly. Wow, we've covered so much already in this deep dive. What stands out to you so far?
I'm amazed at how much personality affects our lives. Honestly, a bit overwhelming too.
Yeah, it's this invisible force shaping our choices, relationships, even politics, like we talked about.
Makes you wonder how much is actually predetermined.
The big question, philosophers and psychologists have been debating it forever.
Maybe we'll never know for sure, but exploring these different approaches, it gives us some clues at least.
Absolutely. So, dear listener, stick around. We'll continue this personality journey in part 2, unravel more mysteries, talk about what it all means for you. Back for more personality talk, I see.
My brain's still buzzing from part 1, self-monitoring, narcissism, political beliefs, even personality types. We covered it all.
And we're just getting started.
Oh boy, bring it on.
Remember, we're not just trying to teach you the concepts. It's about applying this stuff to your own life, the people around you.
Connecting the dots, theory and reality.
Exactly. So last time we were talking about the typological approach, trying to put people into neat little boxes, types.
Right, and it had its problems for sure.
Definitely. But the book makes a point of saying personality assessment, it's not just about labeling people.
More to it than that.
It's about understanding why we do what we do.
So not just saying you're an introvert, but using that info to make sense of how people behave.
Exactly. The book actually uses this example, self-presentation, like how do high self-monitors create their image so well?
It's like they know what to do, what to say in every situation.
Right. And how does personality influence our political beliefs? We talked about that.
Yeah, and even our talking style, it all ties back somehow.
It does, and the book is really clear that deeper understanding of ourselves and others, that's the goal.
Not just categorizing or predicting, but really getting it, the complexity of people.
Absolutely. So the book wraps up this chapter by going back to those 4 approaches to studying personality, remember?
Single trait, many trait, essential trait, and typological.
Different lenses, right, to look at this thing we call personality.
And each has its pluses and minuses.
Single trait, you zoom in on one thing, like we did with self-monitoring, narcissism.
Right, really get into the detail.
Many trait approach that helps us see how a bunch of traits work together, like those studies on talking style and, the political beliefs one.
That one was a mind bender.
Essential trait approach, that's where the big 5 come in, extroversion, neuroticism, all those.
Those are the heavy hitters for sure.
And then typological, it's got issues, but it can give us hints about patterns of traits that might go together.
Like a starting point, but not the whole story?
So looking back, what's really stood out to you? What's been the most insightful part of this whole discussion?
Honestly, just how wide-ranging personalities influences. It affects so much.
It's not just who we are inside, right?
How we act in the world, the choices we make, our relationships, even our politics. It's crazy.
And for me, it reinforces this idea. Personality is like a tapestry. So many threads woven together.
Biology, experiences, culture, everything plays a part.
And all those threads make this unique pattern. That's what makes each of us who we are.
I like that analogy, the tapestry. So the book does mention some resources for people who want to dig deeper.
right? There's a link to a Big Five personality test if you want to see where you fall on those
Oh,
dimensions.
I bet our listeners would love that. We'll put the link in the show notes for sure.
Good idea. And for those interested in the Myers-Briggs, even though it's got its problems, there are links to critiques and to the official MBTI website.
Balanced approach, I like it.
Always good to see both sides. Knowledge is power, right?
Speaking of power, this whole deep dive has really highlighted how powerful personality is.
It's this invisible force shaping so much.
And even though it's hard to understand ourselves and other people completely,
It's worth the effort, you know?
because the more we get at personality, the better we can navigate all this, all the human stuff,
Build stronger relationships.
make better decisions.
Live more fulfilling lives, ultimately.
So, listeners, as we wrap up part 2 here, take a minute, think about what we've talked about,
All these different ways of looking at personality.
see how it connects to your life, the people, you know?
And remember, this is just the beginning.
The world of personality, it's huge, so much to explore.
So stay curious.
Keep those personality lenses clean.
And join us for the final part of our deep dive. We'll tie everything together, leave you with some food for thought.
Final part, time to wrap up this personality deep dive.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, traits, types, all those studies.
My head's spinning, but in a good way. Anything else, any last bits of wisdom from the textbook before we finish up?
You know, there are a few things. The book reminds us, personality assessment, it shouldn't just be some, theoretical thing.
Not about memorizing definitions or getting a high score on a quiz, right?
Exactly. It's a tool to help us understand why people do what they do.
So if we connect those traits to actual behaviors,
Yeah, we start to see the patterns.
like a code to figure out human behavior.
The book uses the example of self-presentation, how high self-monitors manage their image so well.
They're good at it, for sure.
Or think about how personality affects our politics, like we talked about.
Or even our talking style. Like it all comes back to personality somehow.
It does, and the book stresses that understanding of ourselves and of other people, that's what it's all about.
Not just putting people in categories, but like appreciating how complex we are.
Moving past those simple labels, seeing all the differences that make people so interesting.
So as we close out this deep dive, what's the big takeaway for our listeners? What should they remember?
Personality matters. That's the key.
Not just an idea, right?
It's a force. It shapes how we see the world, our relationships, everything.
We talked about the building blocks, how researchers measure it, all the surprising ways traits show up in our life.
But it's just the beginning. The world of personality, it's huge, constantly changing,
Always more to learn,
more connections to make.
more to discover about ourselves and everyone else.
So keep those personality lenses polished, stay curious, and never stop exploring what makes people tick. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a fascinating journey. Thanks for listening.